Hi, I'm Barry Andersen with Barry Andersen Studios, and I would like to review a book today, The Iridescent Light by Michael Axel, The Art of Stand Development. What makes this book so appealing is the idea of stand development, where you actually let the negative actually develop while it's just sitting down for a long period of time versus developing it at the normal time with 5-second agitation for every minute for however long, depending on the temperature and so on. So this is a very hardly written about subject, and it's a very interesting subject because of some of the ways that the clouds develop in the negative and so on that aren't necessarily showing up in a normal negative. Now, I do have some skepticism about stand development because when you do stand development, sometimes it seems like the negative that's developed with stand development versus a normal development doesn't seem to be, it doesn't seem to make too much of a difference on the negative itself. And this is what I say about this book in particular. It's a great attempt at a hardly understood subject. So out of 5 stars, I give this one a 3. Now, there are a couple things that trouble me about this book, and the biggest blaring one is, well, I'll just say the price for one is $50 for this guide, and I probably would have paid about $25 for it. Realistically, if I would have known its content. It's as you can see, it's a really tiny book, but I don't care how big the book is so long as the content's good. And one of the biggest things is, and this is a trouble with any kind of book that's talking about negatives themselves, when you're reproducing a negative and putting it into print, I don't care if it's a scan or a direct contact sheet, you can't really judge that negative too well by looking at those things. It's really best to see a negative in person to see what what it produced, what kind of results it produced. So I applaud the author for making the greatest attempt to reproduce things like sky detail and so on in the negative and put it into a printed format like this, but it's really still hard to judge how good those negatives are without actually looking at them in first person. Now, and I give the author credit for that because again, it is a very difficult thing to reproduce in a book. So, but the more challenging things that I wish that were in the book a little bit more were they didn't have real good side-by-side comparisons of film, development time, and results. What I mean by this is he talked about these characteristics which he said were quote-unquote keep in mind this is subjective. And it's like, well, yeah, it's subjective, but it's subjective because you're not giving a good side-by-side comparison between T-Max film developed at 1 hour, T-Max film developed at 1.5 hour, using this developer like Rodinal or HC110 or whatever developer that's in the book. And of course, you got to take this book as a guide, not as a technical manual. And unfortunately, it is mentioned in the beginning of the book. But it says that it's not a science, but in some sense, developing a negative is a science. You're mixing chemicals at a certain, with a certain amount of agitation, a certain amount of time, and you're going to get fairly consistent results if you keep on doing that. And that's why I don't really like this manual for its non-technical guidance to stand development. Ansel Adams wrote his book The Negative, which he refers to in this book, that Ansel Adams points to the method of at least a partial stand development to develop negatives, which is fine, but again, the technical information hasn't been transferred from Ansel Adams or the artist who's making the negatives in this book. And that's what I would like to see more, and that's one of the biggest things that I would like to see in this book that I did not see. Let's see. Oh, one of the other things that I really didn't like about this book is he talks about a photograph referenced on whatever page, and then and that's another thing. Like all the pages aren't numbered. One of them will have a number on it, and the other side won't. For some silly reason, they did that. They made the book like that. But he'll talk about a photograph, right? He'll talk about a photograph and how it got developed and blah, 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 blah. And then it'll be like 20 pages back, and it's like you have to keep on flipping back between the pages. There's no consistency there, and that's what I didn't like about this book, I guess, is that there wasn't consistency in describing the methods and putting the picture with it. And it just kind of gets frustrating. Most of the photos or the negatives in here are using the Acros, the Fujifilm Acros with the Rodinal combination, which seems to be the author's favorite. But I think in one page he said that the GSD-10 is like something that he likes more, or something like that. Anyways, I'm sorry. But what I'm getting at is, it's kind of like, he talks about these great developers, right? He goes through all these great developers, and he doesn't compare side by side the results with the negatives that he's supposed to compare. One of the portions, he like in the film comparison chapter, he says, keep in mind this is all subjective. It's like, yeah, it's subjective, but the grain should be fairly consistent for this consistent amount of development time. So, again, it's like, I'm sorry I'm beating a dead horse here, but, you know, it's like, you know, you need to be able to write a book with the side-by-side comparison in order to really see the results of these films, and then you can go, aha, so this T-Max was, 100 ISO T-Max was developed at 160 ISO versus 100, and it was developed, stand development was for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever. Now you can see the results, and you can see the comparison. And Ansel Adams recommended that for all of his films, okay? Develop it at normal development time, then develop it at half the half the ISOs, and see where the 11 or 10 zones land in that negative. Like, see how much development time it requires to do that. And that's the kind of testing that was not in this book. Now I got done with all the negative stuff. The positive things I can say about this book is, again, it's a great attempt, and you have some pretty good examples of saying, hey, look at this. Look at these negatives. Look at how thick they are. Look at how well developed they are. And here's a film's, his best results have come from a film called Acros, Fuji Acros 100, which is still available, a little bit more expensive than your HP5 or anything like that, but still, the results are pretty interesting, and I would like to try them. So that's a good thing. Oh, one more thing on the negative side. I'm sorry. The chapter 10 or chapter 13, output considerations, I thought was a completely worthless chapter. This book is about development, so I understand, you know, setting up the darkroom and all those darkroom procedures in one of the chapters, but output considerations, printing. I mean, this book's about developing a negative. It's not about printing. So I don't know why that chapter was in there. Maybe the author lost material to write or whatever, but I thought it was completely pointless. Again, I give this book about 3 stars. I give it 3 stars out of 5 because it's a great attempt, and he gives some really nice examples, which could have been more complete, but he gives some nice examples nonetheless, and it's a worthwhile subject to explore. And with that, I'm Barry Anderson with Barry Andersen Studios. Thank you.